Sunlight poured through the thin curtains of the small apartment like a truth that could not be avoided. Bright, unblinking, exposing everything. Morning traffic hummed below, vendors shouted, and life moved forward with a stubbornness that made the quiet inside feel even louder. On that ordinary bright day, a man stood still in his living room, heart trembling the way glass trembles when touched by a sudden gust of wind. His name was Irish, a single father who had long ago forgotten what it felt like to rest without worry. Pressing on his chest, he held a school uniform that was growing smaller on his little son, Ian, and realized he could no longer hide from the simple fact that life had outrun his savings. The moment was blinding, painfully clear, and it was in that daylight that everything began to change. Before we go deeper into Irish's journey, if you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the quiet miracles that happen when people refuse to give up on one another, then remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel, Stories of Kindness. Your support helps more hearts meet more stories like this one. Irish's life had never been dramatic in the way movies often show. It was the slow-burning, exhausting kind of struggle that sits in the background of every waking moment. He had lost his wife Sanna to an unexpected illness 2 years earlier. Since then, daylight had become both a blessing and a test. Morning brought work, responsibility, and the look in his son's eyes that asked silently whether everything would be okay. He worked as an assistant in a corporate office, a place filled with polished floors, reflective glass, and people who always seemed to be in a hurry towards somewhere better. His boss, Ms. Marine, was known for her composure, for a voice controlled, for eyes that appeared unreadable behind elegant frames. Irish respected her distance. He came early, left late, carried files, managed schedules, and silently prayed that his job would stay with him the way breath stays with lungs. Yet life had its own script. One afternoon, under the full glare of the sun, instead of softening toward evening, his world shook. The company announced major restructuring. Some positions were merging, others vanishing, and the invisible fear in the office became a living thing crawling under everyone's skin. For Irish, the thought of unemployment did not just mean personal loss. It meant his son's school fees, the rent notice already threatening his door, and the quiet dignity with which he tried to live, would all crumble at once. He returned home that day as sunlight still washed the city in gold, but inside he felt only a grey weight. He cooked lentils, pretended cheerfulness for his, and after putting him to sleep, sat by the window, watching day fade. He wondered how much more strength he had left, and whether courage ever really refills itself, or if people simply run on empty out of love. Days passed in uncertainty. Then came the turning point, not with thunder or rain, but under a clear, bright sky that made every shadow sharp. Irish had been called into the conference room. He expected finality, perhaps a polite goodbye woven into corporate language. Instead, he found Miss Marine sitting alone, her usual composure slightly cracked, as if the brightness from outside had exposed more than she wanted to show. She spoke not as a superior, but as someone standing at the edge of something frightening. She was facing a personal crisis, carrying the weight of an inheritance dispute and a need to move temporarily to another city to manage things no one else could handle. The burden was heavier than it looked. She, who always walked alone with confidence, suddenly confessed a quiet fear of being alone. Through this transition, she asked Irish not to let her go through it by herself and suggested that while helping her manage work and life during that period, he and his child could also find shelter until his situation stabilized. In another life, Irish might have refused out of pride or hesitation, but desperation and responsibility shaped choices differently. He thought of his aunt's worn shoes, of cupboards echoing with emptiness, of the eviction notice watching from the table like a witness to failure. He accepted the offer, yet carried within him a question about where he truly belonged, about where someone like him would even fit in such a world. The unspoken doubt stayed inside him, not as rebellion, but as humility. He wondered where he would rest, not only his body, but his heart. In a life that had become a series of borrowed spaces, the new house was nothing like his small apartment. Sunlight flooded every room, bouncing off cream-colored walls, lingering across wide balconies filled with potted plants, leaning toward the light as though they trusted it. It was daytime warmth everywhere, the kind that softens sharp emotions without quite erasing them. Ihsan laughed more freely there, chasing dust motes that looked like tiny floating stars. For Irish, the days began to gain a rhythm. He managed schedules, cooked sometimes when the house felt too big and quiet, and saw in his boss not an untouchable figure, but a lonely woman, carrying invisible storms inside her. Her composure was a shield, but shields get heavy, and he began to notice how often she stood by the window, staring at the horizon as though waiting for answers written in sunlight. They did not exchange dramatic lines or grand declarations. Instead, something gentler happened. Two lives running parallel slowly shifted closer. He helped her with practical tasks, navigated documents, and stood by during meetings that carried both pressure and uncertainty. She in turn noticed the tenderness with which he tended to his child, the patience of a man who had suffered and yet refused to harden. Day after day, under open skies and ordinary mornings, trust grew quietly like a plant that no one remembers planting. Irish, who once thought he was only a temporary presence, began to feel the strangeness of comfort. The house felt less like a place he had entered, and more like a place that had opened itself to him. Yet life's healing rarely comes without testing its strength. Gossip sprouted like weeds in the office. Some co-workers whispered judgments, assuming stories they had never cared to understand. Irish felt those unseen voices pressing at his back, trying to shove him back into the shadows of self-doubt. He worried about how it might affect his job, his dignity, and most painfully, his son's perception of him. At the same time, Ms. Maven faced increasing pressure from her extended family over property decisions, and loneliness threatened to reclaim old ground. Both were being watched by people who mistook kindness and mutual support for scandal or weakness. There were days when Nish thought about leaving, afraid his presence would do more harm than good. But sunlight is patient. On one clear day, while attending to work documents by the open balcony, where wind carried the distant sound of children playing, Irish realized that fear had directed every major turn of his life since Sanna's death. He had been surviving, not living. He looked at his own drawing on the floor, absorbed in bright colors, as though hope was his natural language, and something shifted quietly inside him. He understood that sometimes life brings unexpected companions, not to complicate paths, but to help gather scattered pieces. Change did not happen with one grand gesture. It unfolded in sustained daylight. Bills began to get paid. Ihsan's school uniform was replaced by one that finally fit. Work stabilized as he became essential to managing both the office transition and Ms. Maven's personal responsibilities. More importantly, the house stopped feeling temporary. It became a place of shared meals, shared silences, and the safety of being seen without explanation. Irish rediscovered laughter, a sound that emerged shyly at first, but soon recognized itself again. Ms. Maven, who had once been afraid of crossing difficult phases alone, found courage simply in knowing someone genuinely stood beside her without expectation. Eventually, the crisis that had begun everything began to resolve. Legal disputes settled, the company stabilized, and the noise of speculation faded in the presence of consistent truth. What remained after the dust of change settled was not dependency but connection. Two people wounded in different ways had walked through daylight together and come out lighter. Irish was offered a permanent senior role recognizing not only his work but his reliability through the hardest period. He accepted not as charity but as acknowledgement of his true worth. And then came a realization soft as morning, strong as noon. Irish understood that home is not built by walls or signatures. It forms wherever hearts are no longer afraid of belonging. His question about where he would sleep had never really been about rooms. It had been about whether life still had a place for him beyond endurance. The answer had arrived slowly through ordinary days, bursting with quiet kindness. Yes, it did. As you reach this moment in the story, if your heart felt the weight of struggle, the light of hope, or the warmth of unexpected kindness, then let this be your gentle reminder to engage with the video. Like it, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to Stories of Kindness so these journeys keep reaching more people who might be standing silently at the edge of giving up. Before we end, here is a special request for you. Write in the comments what part of this story touched you the most and what kindness in your own life you are most grateful for. Because your stories of courage might become someone else's strength. Sunlight still fills Irish's mornings. He wakes early, hears his aun's laughter echo through a house that now carries the scent of belonging, and steps into days no longer dominated by fear. He remembers the road he walked from an apartment where silence felt heavy to a life where silence now feels peaceful. He knows pain has shaped him but not defined him. Ms. Maffine, once guarded by distance, now moves through her home with ease. Her steps no longer echoing loneliness, but companionship and trust. Their story is not about being rescued, or rescuing, it's about walking side by side when the world feels too large to face alone. Answer in the full clarity of day, without shadows hiding the truth, their lives continue, not perfect, not scripted, but deeply human. They carry forward with gratitude for second chances, for resilience that hides within fragile hearts, and for the unexpected ways kindness rewrites destinies. The bright world outside keeps moving. People rush past, and yet within that rush exist moments like theirs, reminders that even in ordinary daylight, miracles quietly unfold for those who keep going.